Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, Why Do Cultural Insights Matter to Innovation? My name is Jason Partridge. I'm the VP Client Success at Lux Research and co-founder of Lux Motive Base. And I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. Presenting today is my friend and colleague, Ujwal Arkalgud. He's an EVP and Group Director here at Lux Research. So throughout the webinar, you can type any questions you have in the questions box on your screen, and time permitting, we're going to answer all the questions that we can. If for some reason your question does not get answered, please do not hesitate to email us at questions@luxresearchinc.com. That's questions@luxresearchinc.com, and we will be happy to respond. So we've got a lot of content to get through today. It's going to be a really exciting and interesting topic. I'm really excited for everybody to hear it. So at this point, I will hand the microphone over to Ujwal, and let's jump into the presentation.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Let's dive right in. I mean, this is a hot topic, mainly because we've been getting a lot of questions from clients, especially in the last year or so, about how to bring cultural insights into their insighting process and obviously into their innovation process. And a lot of these questions made us realize that there's some blatant assumptions being made about what is, in fact, a cultural insight and how is that supposed to be relevant to an organization. So we thought this was a great opportunity for us to actually dive into this topic and also a great opportunity to use ChatGPT at the start of a presentation. I've been waiting for this moment. So what is culture? We're going to begin with the basics, right? What is culture? According to ChatGPT, which is not wrong at all, culture is a unique set of beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, and artifacts that characterize a group or society. It's a shared way of life. Let's simplify that a little bit. From the anthropologist's perspective, culture is actually quite simple. It's a system of shared meaning in a context. A system of shared meaning in a context. In essence, culture is everything. It's everywhere. It's impossible for us to live outside of culture because as human beings, we live within systems of shared meaning. Think about any interest you have. You're interested in playing tennis. There's a system of shared meaning around tennis, which affects how you show up, where you go to play tennis, what you wear when you play tennis, how you interact with other people you're playing with, and so on and so forth. Everything has meaning and everything sits in a particular context. But there's a bit of a problem. The problem is that a lot of organizations look at cultural insights as something that only pertains to big social movements. And this is where the problem lies because culture is in everything and everywhere, yet we think of cultural insights as only pertaining to big movements. Whether it's social movements, whether it's cultural movements, political movements, we associate it with big movements. And this is a really important point and a really important break in this presentation for us to pause and say that's not the only frame that we need to apply to cultural insights. Cultural insights is much broader than that. Culture is everywhere. Culture is everything. And I'm going to give you a quick story. You might be aware that when Apple launched the iPod, it was not the first to market. They did not have first mover advantage, and they certainly did not have a product that had technically better features than its competitors. So what led to its success? Lo and behold, it was cultural insights. Apple was smart enough to hire a team of anthropologists to go study the culture of music. And it was these anthropologists that identified that there was, in fact, a cultural movement happening among people who were downloading music for free using tools like Napster. These were a community of people that had a shared meaning. What was that shared meaning? They believed music should be free, it should be accessible by all. And these people that the anthropologists called cyberpunks had their own sense of community, had their own sense of culture. That cultural insight, believe it or not, translated into a very, very tangible outcome, which I'm not going to reveal just yet. You're going to have to wait till the end of the presentation for that. But that cultural insight shaped the future of what the iPod stood for and what it ended up shaping in culture. This is why cultural insights is much broader than just social movements. And by the way, when I say just social movements, I'm in no means diminishing the importance of these social movements and the importance of how they affect our businesses. My point is culture is much broader than that, which means we don't just stand up cultural insights practices when there's social turmoil in the countries within which we operate. Cultural insights practices need to be evergreen, and this is why we're doing this session. So why do cultural insights matter, first and foremost? Why do they need to be evergreen? Because they're innately predictive in nature. They help us go from a reactive mindset to a proactive mindset. They bring cultural sensitivity. They ensure our organizations remain relevant. We all love to throw out the E word these days, empathy. Really, to build empathy, we have to understand culture. We have to understand how the systems of meaning around our particular product, our category, the spaces within which our business operates, and how those systems of meaning are changing and evolving. That's the only way we can remain relevant as professionals operating in the field and as organizations that we represent. And perhaps most importantly, cultural insights constantly push us to upskill our insights teams. They push us to turn culture into tangible and actionable outcomes. And that word actionable is going to be key to our session today. I'm going to talk about not just why cultural insights are so critical and why that aperture on that lens needs to be wider for you, but also why a wider aperture actually helps you make the outcomes a lot more tangible and a lot more actionable than maybe you've been led to believe. But we have a problem, right? In order to address this issue of actionability, we have to address the underlying problem, the elephant in the room, so to speak. And the elephant in the room is that as an industry, as a research and innovation industry, we are obsessed with the what. We are obsessed with new behaviors. And the only reason we think about cultural insights is we go, oh, there's a pandemic. Let's stand up a cultural insights program and let's ask, what is the new behavior we're seeing? Why is that a problem? It's a problem because behavior is an outcome. Behavior is not the underlying driver for change. Behavior is an outcome. Behavior is a manifestation of an underlying shift. And behavior is actually a result of the development of new ideas, and new ideas giving birth to new social norms, eventually giving birth to new rituals, eventually giving birth to new behaviors. So it's actually the why. Ideas and social norms, these meanings, these systems of meanings that crop up, that develop. So for example, take a very simple example. During the pandemic, the meaning around what is sanitary, the meaning around what is clean suddenly transformed in our culture. And as that transformed, it created some new rituals. It also created some new behaviors. But a lot of those behaviors changed within 6 months as people became more comfortable and settled into this idea of living within a pandemic. So why did that behavior change? And what happened to all those companies that made huge bets on that changed behavior? They all struggled 6 months later. Instead, imagine the same companies making bets on the underlying reasons why those behaviors were changing. What happened to those companies? They innovated. They built massive lines of businesses coming out of the pandemic because they focused on how the meaning of what is clean was changing, not on the new manifestation of that meaning. And this is where anthropology becomes extremely powerful. This is why we exist as an organization. This is why we wake up in the morning and do the jobs we do, because we're so passionate about this. But fundamentally, if you realize that meaning gives birth to new behavior, anthropology serves as an incredible way to decode that meaning, because as anthropologists, what do? We analyze language in context. And for those of you who have attended past sessions of mine, this is going to be familiar. So I'm not going to delve into great detail here, but if you are interested and if this is in fact your first webinar with us, there will be links sent out to some grounding webinars that we've done on what is anthropology as well, and I'd urge you to take a look at them. So just very quickly, how do we get at systems of meaning using anthropology? What anthropology allows us to do is allows us to analyze language in context. So in this simplified example of gut health, what you're looking at on your screen is what we would call explicit associations to gut health. So gut health is connected to immunity, for example. So that it's an explicit association because human beings can tangibly, rationally make that connection in their minds. If you question a human being and say, hey, what does gut health mean to you? They'll say, oh, it's about improving immunity, because they can tangibly make that connection. But that's an example of the what, the connection between gut health and immunity. because it's not telling us why that connection exists. And this is where anthropology becomes really powerful, because anthropology is about the associations of the associations. It's about saying it's not enough to just look at the immediate relationships, the explicit connections. We have to look at the broader context of discourse around gut health, because then we can uncover the underlying system of meaning that is mediating that relationship between immunity and gut health. In this case, turns out it's all about people who believe they suffer from toxic health conditions. Imagine uncovering that and realizing, oh, interesting, the interest in immunity around gut health is actually driven by an underlying health condition, or the belief that you have an underlying health condition, like you suffer from chronic back pain, or you think you have toxins in your body and as a result you suffer from chronic pain, and so on, so on. Imagine uncovering that, and imagine the opportunities it then opens up, as opposed to just knowing, oh, immunity is important to gut health. This is really the power of anthropology, is looking at these relationships of relationships, these associations of associations, and in the implicit lies meaning, right? So coming back to the underlying question of what is culture, culture is nothing but a system of meaning and context, and anthropology helps us decode that. So why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because contextually analyzing language allows us not only to understand systems of meaning in a particular context, but it also allows us to now slice and dice different contexts together. So what do I mean by that? Let me make this tangible, okay? So let's begin with a broad analysis of sustainability. So for those of you who attended our webinar at the start of the year, where we shared with you our cultural trends report, you may remember that one of the big shifts we identified at a global stage was how the mindset of sustainability was undergoing change, and it was turning into a mindset of resiliency, where consumers are saying sustainability is about reacting, resiliency is about preparation. And within that mindset, right, within that culture, we uncovered a whole bunch of microcultures around circularity, ethics, the emergence of the new definition of luxury, people associating quality with sustainability, people really focused on end-of-life waste, and ultimately also focused on individualism, i.e., what can I do in order to prepare myself and prepare my families for whatever the next disaster is going to be. When you look at this in isolation, you might go, this is not really actionable. How do I translate a big cultural shift like this into my business? Because I operate as a food company and I don't quite know how this is going to literally translate. This is where the power of anthropology comes into play, because what does anthropology do? Anthropology says, hey, let me take system one, which is about sustainability. Let me take culture two, or system two, which is about food, and let me identify what lies at the intersection of these two systems. What language naturally lies at the intersection of these two circles. And when we explore that through an analysis, contextual analysis of language, we discover, in fact, there is something that is shared in common. Turns out at the intersection of the future of sustainability and the future of food lies three opportunities in particular where sustainable food is about quality. So better quality food should also be sustainable. There's an interesting new definition of quality that's emerging there. And if we have premium products, for example, this becomes a critical input. There's a new definition of luxury emerging, coming out of this, where instead of traveling and spending thousands of dollars going to fancy hotels, suddenly people are looking at the day-to-day things in their lives and identifying small luxuries that they can indulge in. There's a whole movement around nutrition emerging. Now suddenly you've got specific systems of meaning here at the intersection, the overlap of sustainability and food that are significantly more actionable and significantly more useful for you. So this is where a cultural insights practice starts to become extremely actionable and extremely tangible, because now, by applying anthropology, by analyzing culture through the lens of systems of language, contextual systems of language, we can actually match context A to context B and determine if there is in fact an overlap. And by the way, it's highly possible that you see cases where there is no overlap. That's also powerful, just to know that, hey, there's nothing really we can do for our business with this shift that's happening. But shift number two, absolutely relevant to us. right? And it creates this ongoing evergreen model of actionability, which is exactly where I want to take you next. I want to talk to you about what that evergreen model should look like in order to maximize business value, in order to maximize actionability. So here's a best practice model that I wanted to share with you, what a cultural insights program should look like. The top layer is a global analysis of the major shifts happening in culture. So again, for those of you who haven't seen this, we'll send you a link to our Global Cultural Shifts initiative, our Global Cultural Shifts report. You can take a look at that. It is available to you. You can watch our webinars. But step one is really looking at a global scale to say, what are the big shifts happening in culture? And again, just as a reminder, we're not just restricting ourselves to social, political, cultural movements. We're talking about culture more broadly, about shifts in mindset, because again, culture is nothing but a system of meaning in a context. So we want to understand what are the broad shifts. Once we have that, now we want to start making that a bit more tangible to us. So let's say we operate in 5 markets, 5 key markets. What do? Step 2, we localize the interpretation of these global strategic pillars. So for example, if we uncover that sustainability is moving into resiliency, we then figure out, what does resiliency mean specifically in China? What does that mean in the United States? What does that specifically mean in France? And so on and so forth. Step 3 is then adding the secondary context, which is our industry relevancy, which is the example I just showed you, where we take some of these broad cultural shifts and we say, okay, now how does that connect into my industry? I am in the cleaning industry. I operate in quick service restaurants. I operate in food or packaged food, and so on and so on. So now we bring industry relevancy. And when we bring industry relevancy, the goal is to identify what lies at the intersection point, because at the intersection point, we can identify very specific opportunities and actually size and predict how they're changing. And then, of course, the very last lens is about, once you've identified those industry relevant opportunities, you want to obviously track them and constantly analyze how the language in its context is changing and evolving, because then it allows you to stay one step ahead. Ultimately, coming back to the 3 key goals we talked about, right? Goal number 1, let's become predictive. Let's become proactive. Goal number 2, let's upskill our teams, right? And let's take on a very proactive mindset around this. And ultimately, goal number 3 is to become in tune with culture, right? Become empathetic, truly empathetic with how culture and human beings and their needs are evolving. So let's bring this program to life for you with an example, right? So again, going back to our major cultural shifts program that we launched in January, one of the big shifts we saw is our mindset is shifting from sustainability to resiliency. So we're going from a mindset of fixing problems to a mindset of creating systems that prepare us as a society. So we're seeing this big shift. This is at the global scale. The next step is to then translate that to a localized level. So just as an example, we might discover, oh, interesting, this definition of resiliency is slightly different in the US than it is in China. In China, it's actually a bit more mature, but it's no longer growing in the same way. It's actually exhibiting some volatility. On the other hand, in the US, it's less mature, but it's continuing to grow. So there's different implications of that. In China, a bit more mature, but a restricted audience. In the US, lot more future potential, but very small and niche today. So you get that localized interpretation. Once you have that localized interpretation, then what do you do next? Step 3, you bring in your industry lens. So let's say you're a packaged food operator. You bring in your packaged food lens. You realize, okay, there's about a 15% overlap in the meaning of sustainability and resiliency in packaged food. And then you look at what that overlap really is. Again, as a simplified example, you uncover, oh, interesting, the overlap is about a focus on nutrition and specifically on locally sourced or non-GMO options, or you uncover there's an opportunity here in sustainable, resilient food practices. It's about reducing food waste. It's about promoting the use of recycled or recyclable products, and so on, so on. So you uncover tangible opportunities at the intersection point between your category, your business, and the broader cultural shift. Once you identify that, that becomes your underlying learning plan, right? So now you identify what lies at the intersection, you start to quantify that and predict where that's going. When you start to do that, you now have a new learning plan, and that new learning plan may look something like this, starting with the most mature on the right side to the least mature on the left side. And you might realize, okay, got it. We want to react and we want to prepare and we want to be more proactive in the future around attacking the issue of sustainability and how it's evolving at a global scale. We've now translated it into the markets that matter to our business. We've now connected it to our specific categories. And now we've realized, okay, focus number one needs to be on nutrition density and this connection between nutrition density and sustainability. That's a huge opportunity for us. Step number two, there's an opportunity in the new luxury that's emerging. So luxurious ingredients, new sensorial experiences, and how that links into sustainability. The two are inextricably linked. So if we want to promote sustainability, we got to bring it to life, let's say, through a premium line of products. After that comes waste reduction. After that comes a focus on human welfare because it's still developing. Not only does this give you a cadence, it gives you a learning plan that is now much more aligned with the broader cultural shift, but aligned with the specific category that matters to your business, making the overall cultural insights program significantly more actionable, useful, and tangible, not just for an insights team or an innovation team, but also more broadly for the strategic direction of the organization. So fundamentally, right, it's about something that feels higher order, that gets implemented in very, very simple ways, right? That's really what we're talking about here. Because broadly speaking, if you look at cultural insights as something that is higher order all the time, it's oftentimes going to result in the creation of fancy decks that just sit on the shelf collecting dust, proverbially. And we want to avoid that because, as I've established, cultural insights are critical to our organizations. They help us stay evergreen. They help us stay in tune with culture. So really, the application of anthropology in this manner allows us to take something that feels higher order and find very tangible opportunities that translate into much, much simpler implementations than we originally imagined. So let's come back to the example of Apple that I began this session with. So what do you think Apple did when they heard that there's this culture of cyberpunks who are walking the streets believing that music should be free and believing that it's their right to download and pirate music? What do you think Apple did? And what do you think the simplified implementation of that idea was? It's incredibly powerful, incredibly simple. Guess what they uncovered? Every single music product, portable music product out in the market today has earphones and headphones, and guess what? They're black in color. So what do we do to give the cyberpunks a sense of community? Make the earphones white. So when you walk the streets and you see another white earphone, you know that's a cyberpunk. You know that's somebody that shares your belief systems. They also, by the way, launched with a program that promoted Rip, Mix, Burn. It promoted the idea of music piracy, eventually, of course, translating that into a launch of iTunes and pivoting in a way that only Apple can do. But the brilliance of this is taking a cultural insight that's very broad, that you might think is very broad, like, oh, there are people who believe music should be free, and intersecting that with the specific category lens and realizing, hey, actually the outcome can be as simple as changing the color of those earphones, and it will transform how the product is adopted and how it's pushed into culture. So this is really why we wanted to do this session. This is really why I think not just cultural insights is critical to our organizations, but why a lot of organizations are not necessarily doing this right. If your cultural insights practice is not translating into tangible, actionable outcomes, you're not doing it right. And there's a huge opportunity before you. So what are the key takeaways from today's session? Cultural insights are not just about tracking social movements. Culture is everywhere. It's constantly evolving. It impacts our business, whether we like it or not. That's also an important point, right? We might say, oh, yeah, it's not important for us, cultural insights. That's fine. But culture is a force that is constantly impacting your business. You have zero control over it, by the way. Sometimes brands tend to think we can create culture. No, just because you created a meme on TikTok doesn't mean you created culture. Culture takes time. It brews slowly. It creates new meaning. And as we establish new ideas ultimately into new rituals and new behaviors, you do not have the power you think you have as an organization. All you can do is understand how these insights are developing and what you can do to fit within that evolving frame. Culture is all about meaning. And using anthropology, we talked about how we can take broad concepts and specifically put that into the context of our business. And lastly, insights should not feel 50,000 foot level. If they do, there's a missing component, and that missing component is the context of your business. Cultural insights should translate into actionable outcomes for your business. It should translate, or you should have insights that allows you to do the white earphone equivalent for your business. That's the power of cultural insights done right. I thank you for your time. We're open to questions.
Thanks, Ujwal. I do have a series of questions that people have been providing. I'm just kind of playing with the order a little bit and just trying to make sure that I kind of ask them in a way that will kind of build the narrative for us, because we got some really, really great engagement. I think the very first one that I really want to kind of have you speak to is this notion of basically starting high and then working your way downward. Do you always have to start at that first extrapolation point, or start broad? Or can you start with, say, the local interpretation and extrapolate up? Or can you start with an industry insight and work your way backwards? Or do you always have to follow that kind of the path as we've outlined it in this presentation?
Yeah, great question. I think fundamentally the benefit of applying anthropology in this way, so studying patterns of language, is it doesn't actually matter where your starting point is. You could start all the way down and work your way backward. Mainly because we're studying maps of language and we're studying the associations of the associations. So you could say, let's work our way backwards from something as tangible as, a snack bar. So it's absolutely possible. However, what we're talking about here today is standing up an effective cultural insights practice. Mm-hmm. For that purpose, I do believe it's important to begin high and low. And the reason is, if you don't begin high, we run the risk of taking some liberties, right? We run the risk of our own assumptions impacting the broader cultural shifts we land at, which is why, for the purpose of cultural insights, I do believe we need to start high. Again, if you're attacking a specific project for innovation and you're already down into the weeds and you need to extrapolate back, it's absolutely possible. But cultural insights done right, you got to start at the top.
Awesome. And you are creating an amazing segue into the next question, which is, who is generally owning this or driving this work within an organization? What types of teams are you working with?
Great question. We're actually seeing two sides to the coin. One is we're seeing a lot of insights leaders getting the funding and the buy-in from executives in order to build a cultural insights practice within their insights practice, partly because cultural insights is really a way for them to bring ongoing relevancy, especially I would say in organizations that have a much longer history, where it is much easier to get caught up in your own little web in your own little world and miss out on shifts in culture until it's too late. So larger, older organizations certainly is where we see the biggest start at the moment. Mm-hmm. But I would say it's the more innovative insights leaders that are really driving that. And, hats off to them, because they're doing something that the rest of the industry is going to look at them to learn and follow. And we will, by the way, our goal is to have a follow-up to this webinar where we'll try to bring a couple of our clients that have, in fact, done an incredible job standing up cultural insights practices to talk about their experience of doing this. So I'd say that's one piece. The other side of the coin is we have seen this also sit within innovation. But again, it just depends on how the organization is structured. There's some organizations where part of the innovation team is more focused on the research side of innovation, and we have seen this sit there as well.
Great. I think that you made a really important point there that I just really want to kind of pull apart, which is that there's a lot of application that can happen across multiple touch points depending on the organization. So in some instances, obviously this sits really closely in with the insight group. In other instances, open innovation is basically kind of where we start, but we start to basically work more collaboratively across the organization. There are instances where we've gone in, for example, with sensory science as an entry point. So there's a lot of ways within which kind of this approach can really kind of help an organization. Where we start is not always where we end up finishing. So like lots of opportunity with different types of people. This is where anonymity in the questions is really, really helpful. Do you have any tips or tricks on how to help an organization embrace this type of thinking? For example, Insights thinks this way, but sometimes it's hard to bring the rest of the organization along for the ride.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is sort of obvious in the sense that, start small and build on an initial piece of success. I think that's usually the best way to go about this. Certainly in a couple of the organizations where we've helped them build this out, that's how we've done that, right? So we've piloted a program where a key set of cultural insights have translated into a very specific type of business problem. So identify a business problem that's top of mind to executives that you want buy-in from.
Yeah.
Once you've identified that, then bring in a little pilot program where you can connect cultural insights to that specific business problem. And then it gives you something very tangible to demonstrate, because then when you identify opportunities, you can talk about how you got there and the value of having the cultural insights practice as a way to get there. I would say that's the easiest way. It sounds kind of obvious, but certainly that's the way in which we've found the most success among our clientele.
Awesome. Thank you. Do you have any examples of somebody who ignored culture, or a situation where culture was ignored, and kind of what played out as a result of that?
Yeah, I mean, so many examples. Some of them pertain to companies that we work with, and the last thing I want to do is embarrass anybody.
I was about to hit the stop button.
That's right. But what I will do is let me give you a couple of broader examples, and that might be an easy way to attack this problem. Take the air fryer as an example. Okay, so there were companies that had the air fryer as a product, and they kept attacking the issue of healthfulness. They kept saying, "Oh, the air fryer is a healthier way to fry things." Do you think they had success? No. Right? I'll cut to the chase. Absolutely not. They struggled. And why was that? They refused to understand what was actually happening in culture. They think air fryer is going to create a new culture in and of itself of cooking more healthfully. It did not. Again, organizations sometimes get in their own minds and think they have more power than they really do. Now, finally, when they did tap into cultural insights, guess what they uncovered? There was an entire shift brewing, and this in particular happened during the pandemic, where people wanted to up their cooking game at home. They wanted to bring in more gourmet recipes. They wanted to cook fancier things at home. They wanted to elevate their own in-home dining experience. Sometimes they would combine what they're cooking with a couple of things they ordered in, all with the goal of making the in-home dining experience more magical, more sort of, leveled up, if you will. And so within that culture, the air fryer offered them a way to do things, to cook and make certain gourmet recipes in ways that they couldn't otherwise. And that's realizing that completely transformed the fate of the air fryer, by the way, which then ended up in tie-ups with appliance makers and ended up making its way into higher end premium appliances, and the rest is history. But this is a classic example of a product not fitting in until it realizes what cultural shift it needs to fit into, and then making the most of that ultimately.
That's great. And right back to the beginning of the presentation, you referenced ChatGPT. So the question is as a cultural anthropologist, what is your take on this? Is it as big a deal as people are making it out to be, or just treat of the week?
So I can speak to the underlying technology GPT-3 behind ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT is a tuned model of that. I do believe that the underlying technology GPT-3 is very powerful, but it's all about what you do with it. So certainly at Lux Motive Base, we are currently actually experimenting with it. We've been experimenting, by the way, with GPT-3 for more than 2 years. GPT 1 point whatever that was, and GPT-2, and now 3. Mainly because what we're trying to figure out is when we tune the model with our contextual data of language use within the context of a topic, can it do things that will aid our users in the process of interpreting a culture? Can it do things that aid our researchers in the process of interpreting a culture? And we are finding some interesting applications, and I'm not at liberty yet to announce any of them. Certainly, if you're key clients of ours, you will know more about that. We will be running some tests and experiments with some key clients in this area. But fundamentally, it's all about what you do with it. I believe it's a powerful technology. I believe it will shape the future of research. But again, it's about how the model is tuned. ChatGPT in and of itself is not a research tool, by the way, just to be very clear. We do get a lot of questions on this. It's not a research tool. It's a manifestation of GPT-3 in the form of a chat. It's great to say, to try fun things out. It's a great way to, do a little bit of, I would say, broad strokes research, building certain frameworks, thinking through certain problems. It's a great tool to do that, but it is not a research tool. And I think it's up to your research vendors, it's up to research companies like ours to figure out how to fine tune the underlying AI engine with our technologies, with our Motive Base internal AI engine as well, and to see how we can add value to the work our clients are doing.
That's great. There are a couple of other questions that we have here, but unfortunately we're a little bit out of time. So I just want to let everybody know that we will be reaching out directly to the people who didn't have their questions answered in this session. And again, if anybody has any questions that pop into their head, once again, we provided the email at the beginning of the presentation. Just want to take a really quick moment to say thank you, Ujwal. It was a really, really great presentation. This is going to conclude our webinar for today, and the slide presentation and recording from this webinar will be sent to everybody who's attending, and you will see that later on in the PM. After leaving the webinar, you will also be prompted to complete a survey on today's presentation, and we'd appreciate any feedback you may have to help inform and improve any of our future webinars. So please keep an eye out for that. Once again, please take a moment and check out any of our upcoming webinars for more great content, just like what Ujwal has shared with us today. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.